The first thing that made me pause was the jacket. It was draped over the back of one of the dining room chairs when I came home from work. Nothing fancy, just one of those tin corduroy ones, the kind you see in photos from the 70s when every guy thought he was some kind of professor or poet. But it wasn't mine. And it wasn't Natalie's either. That was the problem. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds longer than usual, keys still in my hand, listening. The house was quiet. No music, no TV, no sound of her on a video call in her office. Just that jacket sitting there like it had been invited to dinner. I walked in and touched the fabric. Still warm. That meant whoever had been wearing it hadn't left long ago. I looked around for other signs. There was an extra mug in the sink. 2 plates, 2 sets of silverware on the drying rack. A weird little breadcrumb trail of presents. But what really made my stomach tighten was the faint smell of cologne, something musky, not cheap. And very much not mine. That scent had no business being in my house. I didn't call out to her. I just walked through the kitchen, the living room, her office. She wasn't home. I wasn't even sure I wanted her to be. My hands were still sticky from the trauma call earlier that day. The gloves had been thin, and a guy with a broken rib had coughed blood that splattered past his mask. Normally, I'd come home and tell Natalie about it while she sat at the kitchen counter pretending to be grossed out but secretly fascinated. She always liked the gory details. She once said it made her feel like she was part of something real, something messy and unfiltered. Now I didn't want to tell her anything. Not until I figured out what that jacket was doing there. I left it where it was. No texts. No calls. I took a long shower, changed, and sat on the couch like everything was normal, even though everything was not. When she walked through the door an hour later, hair tied up in a lazy bun, grocery bag in one hand and her phone in the other, I looked straight at her face. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked prepared, like she had rehearsed for something. "Oh, hey babe," she said, walking past me toward the kitchen. I didn't answer. She placed the groceries on the counter and glanced at me. "Long day?" "Not as long as yours, apparently," I said, nodding toward the dining room. She froze. Just for a second. Just long enough. "What?" "The jacket." Her eyes followed my nod. She blinked. That's when she gave herself away. A real innocent person reacts fast. She didn't. "Oh," she said, like it had just occurred to her. "That's Chris's. He came by to talk about the spring recital stuff. Left it behind." Chris. Right. Chris was the pianist at her school. Nerdy guy, married, 2 kids, maybe 35. Looked like he still lived in his parents' basement even though he had a mortgage. And more importantly, I had met him. 3 or 4 times. He barely spoke to me. One of those guys who always acted like he was walking on eggshells around other men. I nodded slowly. Right. Recital. She opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of wine, and poured herself a glass without offering me one. That's when I knew she was covering something. Natalie never drank on a weeknight unless she was nervous or had something on her mind. "You could have called," I said, not raising my voice, just keeping it steady. "He wasn't here long." "You cooked for him?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, he hadn't eaten. We were going over sheet music. I made some pasta. Pasta and wine. For sheet music." She looked at me then. Really looked. "Aaron, come on. Are you really doing this right now?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't have to. The air between us was already thick with something unspoken. She stepped around the counter, glass in hand, and sat across from me. Her tone dropped a notch. "Don't start building stories in your head. He's my coworker. It was dinner. You've worked double shifts this whole week. I've barely seen you." I leaned back, watching her. "So that's it? He came over, you fed him, he left." She nodded. "Then why does his jacket still smell like him?" I asked. She blinked again, and I watched her scramble for the next move. I didn't notice. "I'll get it dry cleaned." Wrong answer. A better one would have been, "You're being ridiculous. Go ahead, smell it. It's nothing." Instead, she tried to erase the evidence, like I hadn't already connected the dots. I didn't push it further. Not that night. I let her drink, let her talk about school, let her carry on like she didn't just step into a trap with both feet. But in my head, the math wasn't adding up. Chris didn't have the confidence to pull something like that off. And Natalie wasn't reckless, not like this. She'd never risk her routine, not unless there was something more serious happening under the surface. Something she thought she could get away with. I waited until she was asleep. Her breathing deepened fast. She always slept heavy after wine. I slid out of bed, went back downstairs, and picked up the jacket. I didn't smell it again. I was done guessing. Instead, I went through the pockets. Left one had a pack of gum. Right one had a hotel key card. Not Chris's name. Not her school's name. Just the hotel logo and a room number. It wasn't even close to our part of town. It was on the west side, near the airport. A place where people don't go unless they're trying to disappear. I stood there in the dark, holding that little plastic card like it was a live grenade. And for the first time in our marriage, I knew something had snapped. I didn't sleep. I stayed up all night just staring at her face, watching how peaceful she looked, how easy it was for her to rest, while my chest felt like it was being crushed by concrete. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I knew exactly what she was hiding and how far it went. I had no idea what I'd find the next day when I used the key card, but I knew I was going, and I knew she would never see it coming. I parked across the street from the hotel and just sat there for a while, watching people come and go through the sliding doors. A few in suits, some looking like they'd just stepped off a flight, others clearly locals who weren't staying for business or family. I wasn't even pretending to be casual about it. I wasn't checking my phone or sipping coffee. I was just sitting behind the wheel with the engine off, gripping that room key between my fingers and going over the same question I've been asking myself all morning. Why here? The room number on the key was 204. Not high up, not too low. That mid-level floor where nobody notices who's coming or going. I waited until the lobby cleared out, then got out of the car, walked straight in without hesitation, nodded to the front desk like I belonged there, and made my way to the elevators. No one stopped me. No one looked twice. When I reached the second floor, I walked the hallway slowly. Room 204 was at the end of the corridor, near the emergency exit. I stood in front of it for a moment, key card in one hand, my phone recording in the other. I wasn't planning to barge in like some movie scene, but I needed something real, something that didn't rely on my word against hers. The lock beeped. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, but not untouched. The bed was made, but the pillows were lopsided, the covers pulled tight like someone had done it in a hurry. The trash had a takeout bag with 2 sets of utensils. There was a receipt on the nightstand for a breakfast ordered just yesterday: pancakes, orange juice, and a fruit cup. 2 entrees. And in the bathroom, a used towel still hung over the shower curtain rod, barely dried. It hit harder than I thought it would. This wasn't a cheap motel. It wasn't a place you pulled into for a half hour and left. This was a quiet, clean, mid-range hotel, meant for people who needed a little more time. The kind of place you bring someone when you want to feel safe, private, uninterrupted. This wasn't just some mistake. This was organized, repeated, intentional. I looked through the drawers, the closet, under the bed, nothing personal, no clothes left behind. Whoever stayed here was careful, but not careful enough. I checked behind the TV, and there it was, her water bottle. That green metal one she carried everywhere. The one with the scratches near the top and the dent at the bottom from when she dropped it in the parking lot last year. She must have forgotten it. I didn't take it. I left it right where it was. I took pictures. The receipt, the trash, the water bottle, even the bed. Everything that showed someone had stayed here with her. Someone who wasn't me. I walked out quietly, didn't slam the door, didn't leave a note. I just left the room like I'd found it and headed back to the car. On the way out, I passed a cleaning lady with a cart. She didn't say anything, just nodded. I nodded back. I sat in the car again, this time not watching the hotel, just staring at my hands. They were shaking a little. I wasn't sure if it was from anger or from how tightly I'd been clenching my fists since leaving the room. I didn't go home. I needed time to think. I drove to the park and sat on a bench, letting the sun burn through my shirt while I kept replaying the last few weeks in my head. Every time she'd been out late, every excuse she gave. Every night I laid next to her thinking we were just going through a rough patch. Around 5, I drove home like it was any normal day. She was already there, making dinner like nothing had changed. She smiled when I walked in, asked me how work was, and told me we were having grilled chicken and rice. I looked at her and nodded, like it was all fine. I sat at the table and watched her move around the kitchen. Her hands moved automatically, like she'd made this meal 100 times. And maybe she had. Maybe she made it after coming back from that hotel, like it was just another stop in her schedule. I listened to her hum a little, something soft, barely audible. She looked peaceful, like she hadn't just torn everything apart and stitched it back together with lies. She brought over the plates and sat down across from me. "You okay?" she asked. "You're quiet." "Just tired," I said. "Rough day." She nodded, took a bite of her food, and chewed slowly. Then she looked up at me again. You sure? You seem off. I met her eyes and held the gaze for a long moment. She blinked first. I said I'm fine, I repeated. Eat your food. She didn't say anything else. Just picked at her chicken, occasionally glancing at me like she was trying to read something on my face. I gave her nothing. No expression, no clues. I was done playing guessing games. I had facts now. I had proof. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not like this. Not while we were still pretending. I wanted to see how long she'd keep lying. I wanted to watch her spin the web a little longer. Because when I finally spoke, I wanted her to run out of excuses. I wanted her to know that she hadn't just made a mistake. She'd underestimated me. The next 3 days were a performance. I played my part better than I thought I could. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner. I asked her about her day. I even kissed her goodnight. Every morning, she smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like our marriage was exactly where it had always been. But I knew better. Every time she looked at me with those soft eyes, every time she called me babe, every time she touched my shoulder or brushed past me in the hallway, it was just noise. It didn't mean anything anymore. She was acting, and I had finally joined the play. On the 4th evening, I decided I'd had enough. I didn't want to spend another night pretending to care what she thought about a show she saw on her lunch break or a kid who played the wrong note during rehearsal. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to watch her squirm. I wanted to hear what kind of lie she'd come up with next. She was in the bedroom folding laundry when I walked in. I didn't speak right away. I just stood there in the doorway, watching her sort my shirts from hers. She looked up and smiled. Hey, I was just finishing this up. Want to order in tonight? No, I said, and my tone made her stop. She put the shirt down and looked at me. What's wrong? I took a step in, shut the door behind me, and leaned against it. I went to that hotel on the west side. Her face froze. She blinked slowly. What hotel? Room 204, I said. Your water bottle's still there. Maybe you forgot. She didn't speak. Her mouth opened, then closed. I watched her chest rise and fall, her hands still resting on the laundry pile, like she was waiting for someone to wake her up. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice cracked halfway through. Try again, I said. Because I've got photos, receipts, and the key card you left in his jacket. You want to tell me who he is, or should I go back and ask the front desk? Her shoulders slumped like I had just hit her in the stomach. She sat down on the bed and stared at her hands. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious. I let out a dry laugh. That's what you're going with. I didn't plan it, she said quickly. It wasn't like I set out to hurt you. Things got weird. You've been distant for months. Don't try that, I snapped. Don't blame this on me. I've worked nights, weekends, holidays, trying to give us a life that doesn't suck. I came home dead on my feet, and you couldn't even look me in the eye. I was tired, not stupid. She stood up, trying to find some kind of strength again, but I could see the panic under her skin. You stopped being here. Not just physically. You stopped noticing things. You stopped caring. I noticed the jacket, I said. I noticed the hotel key. I noticed how you started treating me like a coworker instead of your husband. So don't stand there and tell me I wasn't paying attention. I needed something else, she said, voice shaking. I needed to feel, I don't know, alive, like I mattered to someone. You needed to cheat, I said flatly. Call it what it is. She went silent again. This time, it lasted longer. How long? I asked. She didn't answer. How many times? Still nothing. Is it over? I said. That got a reaction. Her eyes flicked up at me, and I saw something in them I hadn't seen in weeks. Uncertainty. I don't know, she whispered. That was it. The last thread snapped right there. She could have said yes. She could have lied. But she didn't even bother. She didn't have the energy to keep it going. Then I do, I said. It's over. She reached out like she wanted to stop me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. Aaron, please. No. You made your choice the second you booked that room. I'm just here to make sure you understand what it cost. She started to cry, but I didn't care. I didn't rush to her side. I didn't tell her it would be okay. I walked out of that room, down the stairs, and into the garage. I closed the door behind me and locked it. For the next hour, I sat in my truck with the engine off, staring at the garage wall while she sobbed inside. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel powerful. I just felt done. There was nothing left to say. She could cry all night. It didn't change the fact that the life I thought we were building had been replaced by something else, something I never agreed to, something I never wanted. And now, I was going to make sure she regretted it. The next morning, she tried to play normal again. She made coffee, toasted bread, and asked if I needed anything before work like we hadn't just torn everything apart the night before. I didn't answer her. I just stared at the table while she moved around the kitchen, pretending she still belonged in that space. She was trying to buy time, trying to recover some version of control. I wasn't interested in small talk or apologies. I already knew what I was going to do. I wasn't going to scream or break things. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I was going to hit her where it hurt most. Her pride. I took the rest of the week off work, told my supervisor I had a family emergency, and spent those days planning everything. While she sat in our house, walking on eggshells, wondering when the next wave would hit, I was lining up every move. I wasn't going to leave like some loser carrying his things out in a box. No, she was the one who was going to explain herself to the people who actually mattered to her. Her friends, her colleagues, her family. She wasn't going to hide this. I copied everything I had, photos from the hotel room, the receipt, the key card, the messages I found on her laptop when she left it open one afternoon like a rookie. It wasn't just about exposing her. I wanted to remind her every second that she had underestimated me. Every document had a date, a timestamp, a description. There was no room for misinterpretation. It was all laid out, plain and cold, the way truth should be. And then I made the invitations. She was on the board of a music foundation, one of those organizations where they meet every month in someone's home to talk about funding and scholarships. She was supposed to host the next meeting. She had already been preparing for it, bought wine, set aside serving trays, printed out notes. What she didn't know was that the meeting she'd host would be the last one she'd be invited to. I printed out 10 folders, each sealed and labeled. Inside was the full story. Every page, every photo. I included a short note that said, "Ask her if this looks like a one-time mistake." That Thursday evening, right before her guests were set to arrive, I sat in the living room while she arranged fruit on a platter, still pretending nothing was out of place. "You look busy," I said, folding my arms. She looked over, cautious. "Trying to get things ready. People will be here soon." "I know," I said. "That's why I made these." I held up the folders, fanned them out so she could see the labels. "What is that?" she asked, voice already tight. "You'll see," I said. "Don't worry, I made enough for everyone." Her face changed. Panic, confusion, anger, all of it crashing together. She took a step forward. "Aaron, what are you doing?" "Giving your friends what they deserve," I said. "You can either cancel now and explain why, or you can serve your crackers and cheese and wait for the explosion. Either way, I'm done keeping your secret." She moved fast, tried to grab the folders, but I stepped back. "Touch them, and I'll hand-deliver them. You really want me knocking on doors?" Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "This is insane," she said finally. "No, what's insane is you thinking you could lie, cheat, and walk around like nothing happened," I said. "This isn't revenge. This is accountability. You're trying to ruin me." "No," I said. "You already did that yourself. I'm just showing the others what you've become." Her phone buzzed on the counter. She ignored it. Probably someone asking if they should bring dessert. "I'll tell them it's fake," she said. "Photoshop. You made it up. Then I guess you better start practicing your speech." The doorbell rang. She flinched. I didn't move. "I swear, Aaron." "I'm not listening," I said. "Do what you want. Spin whatever story you can manage. But those folders are going into hands tonight." I walked past her, slow and calm, opened the door, greeted her guests with a polite nod, handed out the first 2 folders, and left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove away, not caring what happened next. Later that night, I got a text from one of the board members. Just one sentence: "She's not coming back to this group." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The next morning, she wasn't home. Her things were still there, her car in the driveway, but she wasn't. I sat down, made my own coffee, and ate my breakfast in silence. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel like a trap. She came back around noon, eyes red, shoulders stiff. "Are you happy now?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I'm finally breathing again." She didn't respond, just walked upstairs and shut the door. And I let her. 2 days after the meeting, the silence in the house stopped feeling tense and started to feel hollow. She didn't go to work. I could hear her walking around upstairs during the day, but she didn't come down unless I left. We weren't speaking, barely looking at each other. I had taken the couch without being told to. I didn't want to sleep near someone who had spent months sneaking off to another place, another person, then coming home and laying her head next to mine like it was nothing. I thought exposing her to her friends and colleagues would bring me some kind of peace. And for a while, it did. But then the numbness settled in. Not sadness, not anger, just a flat, heavy emptiness that made everything feel pointless. The food didn't taste like anything. The house felt smaller. Even my routines felt like they belonged to someone else. She came downstairs late that Sunday. It was almost dark. I was eating dinner at the kitchen table, not even sure what I had put on the plate. She walked in slow, arms folded across her stomach, like she wasn't sure she had the right to be there. She sat across from me without asking. "Can we talk?" I didn't look up right away. I finished chewing, swallowed, pushed my plate aside. "Go ahead." She hesitated. Her voice was raw when she spoke, like she hadn't been using it. "I know I messed everything up. I know what I did, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to talk to you like a person. Not like a stranger, not like someone you're planning to destroy. You stopped being my person a long time ago," I said. "Now you're just someone who shares the mortgage." She nodded like she expected that answer. "I wasn't looking for a new life," she said. "I wasn't trying to leave you. I wasn't even thinking about consequences. I just wanted to feel like I had something that was only mine." "You had that," I said. "You had a life, a home, someone who never questioned your loyalty until you gave me a reason to. I never checked your phone, never followed you, never made you prove anything. I trusted you with everything. And you handed that trust to someone else." "I didn't love him," she said quickly. "It wasn't about love." "Then what was it?" She went quiet again. Then finally, it was escape. From everything. From the pressure, from feeling like I wasn't seen anymore. "You stopped letting me see you," I said. "You stopped talking. You pulled away. And instead of telling me, you handed parts of yourself to someone else and came home like it never happened." "I thought I could stop," she said. "I told him it was a mistake. I told him not to contact me anymore. But it kept happening. I kept letting it happen. And now what?" I asked. "What do you want now?" "I want to try to fix it," she said. "I want to be honest with you, even if you never forgive me. I don't want to live like this. I want to rebuild something, even if it's not a marriage." "Why?" "Because I still care about you," she said. "Because I hate what I did. Because I see what I've become, and I don't want to stay that person." I leaned back in the chair and looked at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She looked exhausted, worn out in a way I hadn't seen before. Like she finally understood that this wasn't just a mistake, it was a collapse. I thought about all the years we had spent together. The birthdays, the fights, the weekends doing nothing that felt like everything. I remembered how she looked the first time I saw her cry at a movie. How she used to send me songs she thought I'd like. How we used to fall asleep holding hands when the world still felt solid. "I don't want revenge anymore," I said. "I already did what I needed to do. You've been humiliated, and now I feel nothing. That's worse than being angry. I used to look at you and feel love. Now I just feel tired." "So what happens now?" she asked. "I'm moving out at the end of the week," I said. "I already talked to a lawyer. We'll split things clean. No screaming, no chaos. Just done." She nodded slowly. "And you won't talk to me anymore?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe someday, but not now." She looked at me, her eyes watering again, but she didn't let them fall. She just nodded once more and got up from the table. Before she walked away, I said, "You didn't just cheat on me. You ended something real. You broke something that won't come back. I hope whatever you were chasing was worth it." She turned around and said, "It wasn't." And then she left the room. By the end of the week, I had packed everything I needed into the back of my truck. Clothes, books, my tools, the few personal things that still mattered to me. I didn't take any of the shared stuff, the furniture, the kitchen items, the framed pictures she'd arranged all over the house. Let her keep the things she curated. I didn't want any of it following me to wherever I was going next. There wasn't any big scene. No argument. No emotional breakdown at the door. She stood by the stairs while I loaded the last box, arms crossed, watching me like someone who had no idea how to undo what she'd done. She asked if I wanted to say goodbye. I told her that saying goodbye would imply there was still something to close properly, and I didn't feel like pretending we had anything left. I drove to a place I'd already rented out in cash, small unit in a quiet complex, not far from work. It wasn't big, but it had a clean space, a working stove, and no reminders of her. The first night I slept there, it was silent in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No footsteps on the stairs, no clinking dishes, no sound of her brushing her teeth or moving in bed beside me. Just quiet. And even though it was strange at first, I didn't hate it. I woke up without pressure. I didn't have to navigate around anyone else's moods or walk on thin ice wondering what lie might be waiting behind a casual sentence. I just got up, made coffee, and started figuring out how to live again. The guys at work didn't ask questions. I think they knew something happened. People aren't dumb. They notice when a man stops talking about his wife and shows up with shadows under his eyes. But no one pried. They just kept things moving, which I appreciated. My supervisor gave me extra hours when I asked for them, probably thinking I needed the money. I didn't. I needed the distraction. I spent my weekends doing things I hadn't done in a long time, walking around town, checking out places I used to like before everything became routines and excuses. I started going to the gym again. I stopped drinking every night. I wasn't trying to reinvent myself. I just didn't want to waste any more of my time being stuck in a version of life that wasn't real. I'd already lost enough of that pretending everything was okay while it fell apart behind closed doors. A few weeks later, she texted. Not to argue, not to blame, just a simple message. I hope you're okay. I read it twice and didn't answer. I didn't block her. I just let it sit there. She didn't follow up. Maybe she knew better. Maybe she just wanted to send something into the void to feel like she still mattered. I didn't care either way. I started seeing a therapist. Not because I broke down or couldn't cope, but because I wanted to understand how I let things get that far without noticing. I wasn't there for sympathy. I wanted clarity. We didn't talk much about her. We talked about me, my expectations, my blind spots, how I avoided conflict to keep the peace and ended up drowning in silence. I didn't walk out of every session with some great discovery, but little by little, things made more sense. I saw where I had let the wrong thing slide, where I had been too passive, where I had allowed her to carry the story while I just nodded along. I owned my part, not as an excuse for what she did, but as a way to make sure I never ended up in that kind of mess again. About 2 months after I moved out, one of her friends reached out. Not someone close, just an acquaintance from those boring group dinners she used to drag me to. She told me Natalie had stepped down from her foundation board. She'd gone quiet, didn't post anymore, stopped showing up to school events. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? That I felt bad? I didn't. She was embarrassed. Good. Actions have consequences. Let her explain it to the mirror if she needed someone to listen. The thing I kept thinking about wasn't the betrayal itself, but the way she carried it. The planning, the excuses, the calm face every night. That was the part one couldn't let go. Not the act, but the effort it took to lie to someone you live with, to come home knowing you've done something you never intend to admit. That's what ended us, not a hotel room or some weak man with too much time and too little integrity. It was the conscious decision to look me in the eye and keep lying. Now, I don't think about her much. I still carry the memories, but they don't hit me the way they used to. I don't flinch when I hear a song she liked or drive past a place we went to. That part of my life is over. I didn't ask for it to end that way, but I'm not mourning it either. I gave everything I had. She made her choice. I survived it. And now I'm finally living without dragging dead weight behind me.